Hello, this is John with Theology Ed. I hope you're all doing really well. In the previous video that I did, I talked about white noise and Barbie, primarily Barbie. However, as an introduction to Barbie, we talked about white noise as well because white noise and Barbie had the same creators. We had Greta Gerwig, who starred as Babette in White Noise, and Noah Baumbach was the one who wrote and directed it. But then, who wrote and directed Barbie? Greta Gerwig, and Noah Baumbach. And so we have both of them teaming up for both of these projects in important ways. And they were not even a year apart, released not even a year apart, and they had similar themes about the fear of death being very important. And you know, we talked at length about that, or we talked about their similarities in various ways. But when I was doing the introduction to the Barbie film by explaining a bit of white noise so we remembered what it was about, I got to Mr. Gray. And I said, you know what? If the video was going to be long, I'll put off Mr. Gray for another time. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to talk about this because it's an important character. He's not just a guy. He's more than just a guy. Remember, in White Noise, we have Jack and Babette functioning as in an allegory as basically Osirian culture or institutions, the church, the Roman Catholic Church, like the Pope, see, and the United States, like JFK here, holding hands. They're holding hands, same colors, same light shining on them as they die. It's representing their death here. Okay, and so what we're seeing is the death of these institutions. Okay, and the person who killed them was Mr. Gray. And what's interesting, if you look closely, when they go into this hospital/clinic, it's a former church repurposed for the purpose of physical health. In other words, it's sort of a showing the end of Christianity. Even the churches are being repurposed. The spiritual meaning is gone. The nun in the church, they ask the nun, does the church still believe in heaven, or do you still believe in heaven, like in the picture? And the nun ridicules them for being so naive and ridiculous to think that they still would believe in that sort of a thing. And so it's completely secularized, repurposed, and now it's being used as sort of a post-Christian church or a post-Christian service center, in a sense, to help people. But notice that when they go in, you have the cross, the crucifix, and the two shadows, like the two criminals who were crucified at the side of Christ, at the sides of Christ, and Christ crucified in the middle. But notice we have Mr. Gray in the position of Christ, and them in the position of the criminals, being the thieves and murderers, being put to death. Okay? And in this case, instead of Christ dying for you, Mr. Gray is going to survive, and Babette and Jack are going to die. He's functioning almost like an Antichrist. Okay? He's in the place of Christ, without the self-denial, without the sacrifice, and in fact causing the harm. So instead of dying so that they wouldn't die, he kills them so he wouldn't die. All right? Now, so the question then is, who is this Antichrist figure in the film? I say an Antichrist figure. I'm not saying, don't think horns and a pitchfork Antichrist. I'm using it in the sense of in the place of Christ and contrary to the nature of Christ and purpose of Christ and person of Christ. Okay, who is this character? And we looked at this. He's the one that killed them. He took a shot at them under the April 8th, 2024 eclipse, but doesn't kill them until when? So they get shot here, but they die in this room after the license plate, which seems to be pointing to 2028, perhaps July 6th, perhaps the 17th of June, perhaps not a date here, perhaps it has some other significance, and there was a lot of speculation in the comments, interesting stuff. You can read over that of the Barbie video. But this does look like 2028 because what you have is the T as the 20th letter of the alphabet, the 2, and then the H is the 8th letter. So 2028, 2028. And they go here, and we get this, center of the picture as they prepare to open the door and drag Mr. Gray out of the car and bring him to the clinic, where they'll die and he'll survive. Okay, so we see this date here. So it looks like the shot's taken sometime after the 2024 April 8th eclipse. I think that's probably the Trump election and Trump presidency. And the death comes with the end of that term, perhaps. Perhaps it's at the end of the term that there's not a peaceful transition of power, or perhaps he's replaced in some way and the opposition is completely different. Perhaps there's a civil war between now and then that takes off, or world war. Who knows what the plan is exactly? In the discussion of Barbie, we saw that similar to this, it does seem to point to a period that goes until around 2028, at least that election. And perhaps that election only marks the beginning of the term that will finally lead to the complete end of the United States. It's interesting, we all expect things to happen overnight, and as we've learned, it doesn't happen overnight. Well, anyways, so we see this 2028 on the plate, and so who is Mr. Gray? Now that we're here, who is Mr. Gray? At the beginning, or early in White Noise, when he's in bed, Jack and Babette are in bed, they have a conversation in which they both express the desire that they don't outlive the other person, because if they do, how will they live without him and all of that sort of thing. And Jack concludes and says, "I hope we both live forever, doddering, toothless, liver-spotted, hallucinating." And then he pauses and he looks up. Well, it's almost as if she's not paying attention anymore. He's talking almost to himself. Who decides these things? Now, that's the opportunity for something like God to be brought in if this wasn't a secular film. It's not. Instead of them appealing to God or him taking comfort in some sort of religious answer, the answer says, who's out there? You look up, and it's an empty room, and you just see a car passing. Very hopeless in a sense here. And then it flashes to symbolism from Nazi Germany, or footage from Nazi Germany, like fascism. But here, interestingly, what it goes up to is a spot where Mr. Gray will later be seated shortly after this when he has a nightmare. So we go to these windows. If you go here's later, when he is in bed, you come down, and what do we have? Mr. Gray in his room, seated over there. Who decides these things? Life, death, whether we live forever or die. Who? Who decides whether the Catholic Church in the United States and the West survives? Who decides whether we live? And it's a scary thing, because what it's hinting at here is that Mr. Gray, whatever he is sort of like a modern or contemporary expression of the same sort of spirit of fascism that you had in World War II in Germany in that period. Okay, and so what you have is fascinating. It's a really interesting way to point out who Mr. Gray is, because you're looking here, who decides these things, and you have to remember, the camera pans there to the windows before you see the footage, and just shortly after that, it's going to go the other way. And who decides these things? Mr. Gray does. Mr. Gray does. And so who decides who dies? Who's the killer? The new expression of the old fascism, Mr. Gray. Okay. Now, later, when they're in the supermarket, which is the place where you, between life and death, it's like a transition place. It's represented that way by Murray. And they're talking about death, and maybe once we stop denying death, we can proceed calmly to die. What if death is nothing but sound? Notice who's here. Mr. Gray behind between the doors. He's talking about death. We simply walk toward the sliding doors. Going through the sliding doors is death. That's where you're going to die. Okay, what if that's it? And then it goes to white noise. Just hear cash registers and voices over the loudspeaker and all of that. And he's reflecting on death very, very seriously. And in comes Mr. Gray at that time. Here's what now, cool, crush, jolt, high C. We talked about in the white noise series that they corresponded to the 5 eclipses. Now, cool, still cool, crush, jolt, high C perhaps referencing high intensity conflict, which is a way to refer to it. Okay, but he's getting all sorts of stuff. And here we have Mr. Gray. What does Mr. Gray do? He walks in, he's talking about that. You hear it forever. Sound all around, white noise and death. He's reflecting on something very serious. And right then, Mr. Gray just flicks his card away dismissively, and it breaks the tension. He doesn't care about your death. He is completely dismissive of you, your well-being. He's cold. And I think it's interesting, the scar on his hand, we don't hear much about it, but knowing that his position is that of Christ later in the video, in the film, in the clinic, the emergency clinic, it may be a way to point to like the scar of a passion event, just to point out that he's an antichrist figure in the place of Christ. But then he flicks it away. You can't have a gesture that's more dismissive of somebody, just flicking away. And in the middle of his, deep meditations and thoughtfulness and anxiety and so on. Mr. Gray doesn't care, whoever he is. So we're getting characteristics about Mr. Gray so far. Now, Mr. Gray is involved in research, okay, and this is very interesting. Babette, when Jack finally calls her out on her taking Dylar, which she hasn't admitted she's taking, he asks her, to be open with him, to tell him the truth, to confide, to reveal, and all of that stuff. And Babette tells the story. And she gets to the part where she's going to introduce Mr. Gray. She says, I did all this research, but I was getting nowhere. The condition hung over my life. She hasn't said what the condition is. The condition was just the fear of death. Then one day at the supermarket, I was reading a tabloid online. Online. There was an ad. Never mind exactly what it said. Volunteers wanted for secret research. So this is secret research. This is not authorized. It's not, legal. I answered the ad and was interviewed by a small firm doing research in psychobiology. Let's call the company Gray Research. Gray, not black, not white. It's in this moral middle ground, right? Although that's not the true name. Let's call my contact Mr. Gray. Mr. Gray is a composite. It's not an individual person. I was eventually in touch with 3 or 4 or more people at the firm. So Mr. Gray is not actually representing only an individual person. Mr. Gray is representing, if you want to think of it this way, like an institution. One that operates in secret, one that operates outside of the normal systems and law and institutions and so on. It's in that gray area. It's going to be data-driven, the way she's expressing it. Basically, it's almost like the new face of fascism is no longer, a guy with an ideology. It's like a psychopath with data and numbers and research and who doesn't care about you at all. Completely dismissive, doesn't even treat you like a human. And your cares, worries, and so on don't matter. Just going to follow the data, do research with you, and use you however they see fit until they no longer need you, at which point you're, cast off in whatever way they want. In the film, killed. Now, so he's a composite, and she doesn't say anything about his headquarters. But the point is, they took test after test. See, data. They were doing it like they weren't worried about the legalities of it. They were just going to do tests and then decide whether she was a qualified candidate, perhaps even just lying along the way in order to get her as a candidate because they didn't really care, perhaps. But Mr. Gray said that she was one of the 3 finalists, and she was then the subject of an experiment, a super experimental and top secret drug, one that came outside the legal system, of course, codenamed Dialer. And Jack asked, when did this begin? Something like that. And she says, maybe a year and a half ago. Very interesting, because a year and a half before the film was released was at the turn of the year from 2020 to 2021. And so she's saying that, of course, the movie is set in the 1980s. However, if the release of the film were a hint of something and the creators had suspicions about what was going on in the world, it could be pointing to the idea that Mr. Gray is the representation of those elites, the institutions, or the people that operate in secret that were pushing an experimental drug a year and a half ago. And that's when it began, because it maps on. And so I don't know their intention on that. However, we'll leave it at that. So what you have is this Mr. Gray is not a single person, but a composite of persons, analytical, non-ideological, probably, to some extent, data, that regards law as irrelevant, or at least something that can be ignored, because decisions are technical, eventually performing research on Babette, representing America, by way of giving her a top secret, brilliant, dazzling, it says this in the film, experimental drug using cutting-edge technology, starting around 1.5 years earlier, perhaps, from the start of the film, or at least then the time when she learned this in the 1980s when the film set. 1.5 years earlier, before the film, that would be around 2020, 2021. So Mr. Gray seems to be pointing to a pusher of experimental drugs on the U.S., and even, as we'll see in a minute, occupying the U.S., controlling the U.S., becoming one with the U.S. through, in the film, sexual relations. But this oneness makes the U.S. sort of like the instrument of Mr. Gray to deal with this drug distribution, because it's after Mr. Babette takes it that the knowledge of Dialar spreads to Jack, who then wants to take it too, and he goes hunting it down to try to get it desperately. Okay? Anyways, see, here's Mr. Gray and Babette, Jack looking at the TV, and he sees them become one. He's imagining this because he knows, and there they are, they become one. The U.S. and Mr. Gray become one in some sense. The U.S. doing something un-American, right? That's the way it's described. She even wore she wore a ski mask to hide her face because she didn't want to be un-American and kiss Mr. Gray, as if just not kissing, but allowing this other sexual capitalist transaction, which is what she calls it in the film, makes it somehow compatible with good values. She just had to do it. But she became one with Mr. Gray. And after she becomes one with Mr. Gray, it's interesting because the shot taken at Mr. Gray initially, it doesn't kill him, but it wounds him. It happens when he's on the toilet like Elvis, and the film talks a lot about Elvis, and Elvis is always representing America, the American side. And so he almost dies like America does. But what dies only is America. She ends up getting shot afterwards, along with Jack. And he, whatever this system is, these institutions, this network of people that are powerful and operating in secret, super secret drugs and things like this, doing all of this, somehow the plan is he survives. He recovers after the fall of the Western system and the Osirian system, if you want to think of it that way. Okay? The way the Thelemites would talk about. Excuse me. And closely related to consumerism. Mr. Gray is very closely related to consumerism, marketing, and the electronic environment we live in. The film talks about waves and radiation, and it's, I don't think, a coincidence that at the end of Mr. Gray's life, when he's threatened with death and Jack is pointing a gun at him, he starts to speak like he's a television narrator. And he starts talking about, sales almost. Right here. Or you can eat natural grains, vegetables, eggs, no fish, no fruit, or fruit and vegetables, animal proteins, no grains, no milk. Or lots of soybean milk for B12 and lots of vegetables to regulate insulin release. But no meat, no fish, no fruit. There are endless workable combinations. Did you ever wonder why, out of 32 teeth, these 4 cause so much trouble? I'll be back with the answer in a minute. That is how you keep, in the 80s, somebody watching TV as it goes to the commercial break. A little teaser, right? And so we're getting him almost functioning like the waves and radiation. They're controlling the environment of propaganda, advertising, marketing, and everything else that we live in. And remember, the pills Mr. Gray gave caused people who took them to confuse words with reality. So that if you heard something like, I forgot, gunfire or fuselage or something like that, you would become afraid as if it's actually happening. And that's how the propaganda system works. They speak, they generate fear to motivate, to control, because what they say, it's as if it's real to the hearers. And what they're giving you makes that possible, right? So the idea is he's a manipulator, he's controlling you, and he's trying to get out of his death with advertising. I'll be back with an answer in a minute, hoping he won't get shot, but he gets shot. Okay, and Heinrich, earlier in the film, of course, during the waves and radiation section, or maybe it's a little later, I have to go back and look, but I think it's after. But he is talking. He's Jack's son, Jack and Babette's, Jack's son. The real issue is the kind of radiation that surrounds us every day, the waves and radiation. Your radio, your TV, your microwave oven, the power lines outside the door. Forget clouds, the toxic clouds, toxic airborne events. It's the electrical and magnetic fields. So we get hints of this as well. And I suspect this reference, I'll be back with the answer in a minute, and his appearance in the supermarket in the midst of the white noise, and which is identified with death, and him as death at the doorway, the sliding doors. I suspect that it's all looking to this gigantic network of things controlled by these people behind the scenes or institutions that effectively mislead people, okay, and are dangerous and cause harm. Now, and he's passed off as Mr. Rabbit. When he picks up the bunny that Jack's one of the kids dropped, and Jack had to run back to get it, he hands it to Jack, and we get this picture. And we see Mr. Gray's face occulted by or hidden by the rabbit's face, suggesting he's Mr. Rabbit. And that's, I think, pointing to other films and TV. So if you go to Utopia, where you have Doomsday Comics and Utopia, this was a show in the UK where a graphic novel is sort of turns into a graphic novel was written that she wants to study, and the graphic novel itself is not just fiction. It's sort of basically almost like we would call predictive programming. It's coded information that's accurate, but contained in a place that you wouldn't necessarily usually look for veridical information, right, for something true about what's going on in the real world. And it was called the Utopia Experiment. And it's about a scientist who makes a deal with the devil for knowledge, and the devil appears in a number of guises, but always as an animal-human hybrid, most notably a rabbit. And the network we find in the second episode of season 1 is a network of people like this, like Mr. Gray's group of people. Okay, it's not an individual person, but The network was created by two men, a geneticist called Philip Carville and someone called Mr. Rabbit. Mr. Rabbit. It's a code name. No one knows the real identity. When the Cold War began to wind down, the various governments involved decided to back away from what the network was going to do. And the network's plan was to, through Mr. Rabbit, who can change. Mr. Rabbit can be some one person at some time, another person at a time, but it's the head of this secret organization. In the series, Mr. Rabbit ends up being Catherine Milner, who has a plan to spread a deadly strain of Russian flu and then administer a vaccine designed to render almost up to 95% of the human population infertile, to administer the vaccine to the global population based on a fake flu virus or a flu virus that was actually used as a bioweapon with the purpose of scaring people into taking the vaccine, the goal being the vaccine for depopulation, to handle the combat overpopulation. All right, and so here we get a hint, again, here we get another hint that Mr. Gray is Mr. Rabbit, the guy who's doing Catherine Milner's work. Okay? And so we get a lot of really interesting things. So he's passed off as Mr. Rabbit. And so he is in the position of the savior of the U.S. and the West, right? He's the one they turn to save them from disaster and their end and their collapse. But in fact, all he does is save himself, and what he does to them brings them down and brings them to their end. That's who Mr. Gray is in the film. And so he's a really interesting character and probably corresponds to the Mattel executive board and CEO in Barbie, where they are not actually concerned about little girls' dreams or whether Ken is more profitable products than Barbie products. Ken products are more profitable than Barbie products. They don't care about even the money. What they are most concerned with is that ideas among the people just stay ideas and don't undermine their position in the world. And if Ken and Barbie have to suffer for it and everybody else has to just stay where they're at, they're fine with that as long as they survive. And that's what Mr. Gray is. All right. So that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And be faithful. Stay with Christ. Take care.